What's up, guys? Four-wheeler doctor back again. Just now realized I didn't have my hat on, so not real sure what my hair looks like, but if it's messed up, I just woke up. If it's not, I just fixed it. So today we're gonna be tearing down this Brute Force motor. This is one we took off a few days ago. This is actually a 650 motor, but it's pretty much the same as, well, actually it's identical to the 750 other than cylinder size. So I'm gonna show a tear down, and I'm gonna try to label this thing as both a 750 and a 650, because that's pretty much what it is. As you can see, we still got the clutches on, pretty much fully assembled. Didn't really take anything off the off the motor when I took it out of the bike. So I'll start off with taking this the clutches off. Got a bunch of 10mm bolts running around here, and that's really all you got to take off, the 10mm, and then the cover will come off. Let me pull them out real quick, and I'll show you how to get the clutches off next. Alright, got the clutch cover off. This is what you're left with, the secondary and the primary clutch. This is a 27mm normal threads, and this is a 19mm reverse thread. So take this nut off, and this is actually a long bolt. Pull both of those off, and keep those together. As you can see, this belt here has seen its better days, so we're going to end up having to replace the belt on this thing. But let me get these pulled off, and I'll cut the camera back on to show you. Actually, I'm going to show you how to pop this one off with the puller. So let me get the nuts off, and I'll put the puller in. Alright guys, I got this has got a 27mm nut and 2 washers on it. Make sure you hang on to those. And then the bolt here has a funny little step washer, as well as 2 flat washers on the top end. To get this thing off, guys, you about got to have a puller. Actually, I don't say you have to have a puller to get this thing off. And don't try to skimp when you buy one of these things. Speaking from experience here, if you buy a cheap puller, that's what you get. So you can end up really messing some stuff up with a cheap puller, breaking the puller off. And people have tried other things. This is kind of an odd thread pattern on here. People have tried bolts and things like that and end up messing the clutch up, and it's really a booger to get off there if you mess this clutch up, mess the threads up in the clutch, because it's dang near impossible. You can really do some rigged up stuff and get it off, but it's better not to. So you run this puller in, put a little bit of oil on the threads to make it a little easier to go in. Hit the impact on it, and that's it. It doesn't get any easier than that. And like I said, I don't know how many clutches I pulled off with this puller, but it's more than you can count on your fingers and toes, probably twice. So and it still works great. So don't skimp. Buy one of those, and you're going to eventually have to replace a belt on a Brute if you own one. So it's worth your money to go ahead and get one. All right, so you just slide these things off. Primary first, secondary, you can wiggle the belt off of there, and the secondary clutch will just slide off. Might need 2 hands. It's I won't say it's pressed on there, but it's a little bit tight. So there you go. And so now this is what you're left with. While I'm here, I'm probably going to go ahead and take off this clutch back plate here, 3 8mm bolts. And that's where you have to get to your timing hole up in here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull those off, and I'll cut the camera back on when I get this thing flipped around to the other side. Alright guys, I got the clutch back cover off, those 3 bolts out. I'll show you a little trick. This is the timing cover hole you want to get out. You can save one of those 8mm bolts, and it will actually thread into the center of that little hole. And then you can take anything to pull that thing out of there, a pair of pliers. I like to use a claw hammer, and it's got a O-ring on it, so it's going to be a little bit tight. Let me see if I can do something with the camera here. Didn't really plan on it being this tight, but just wiggle that thing around, drop it on the floor. Then when you pick it up, you got your cover with the little bolt still stuck in it, and that gives you access to your front timing chain. So just a little trick to get that thing out of there. Alright, throw that in your tote, and let me flip this thing around, and we'll start tearing off the stuff from the other side. Alright guys, next thing we're going to take off this pull start cover. 4 10mm bolts. This one's already missing one, so there's only 3 in this case, but 4 10mm bolts to get that off, and will give you access to the end of the crankshaft. So let me pull those off, and I'm probably going to also go ahead and pull this water outlet off. There's 4 8mm. You don't have to loosen this up. If you check out from my other video, this is the drain. So pull these 4, and this cover will come off. So let me get those out, and I'll cut the camera back on. Alright guys, got the pull start off. Got all these bolts loose on the water pump, and as I took that last one off, it got kind of stuck in the socket, so I wiggled it around, and it ended up popping the cover off. I want to keep up with these bolts because they're 2 long ones and 2 short ones on this water pump cover. Well, they really won't go back in there any other way, but keeps you from having to guess when you get ready to put it back together. Alright, so the cover will come off now and expose the impeller. There's a couple little dowels here, one here, one here. I usually pull those out and stick them in a Ziploc bag because sometimes they'll fall out. I try not to lose more stuff than I have to, because most of the time these type things have a purpose. So there's a dowel there. It's just a real small thing. And pull this other one out. There are those 2, and now we're left with the impeller. To get that thing off, it's just a 10mm stud sticking out of the front of it. So you can just hit that with the impact real easy, and it'll come off. So that's your impeller. And then the next thing you need to take off is this crank bolt. I think it's a it's either 17 or 19mm. I believe it's a 19. So hit that with the impact. Alright, pull that off of there. And you also have to remove this little plate here. The easiest way to get it off, take 2 screwdrivers, 2 small screwdrivers, and stick in on each side of it, and just barely pry out on it, and it'll pull it right out of there. Hang on. There we go. Camera gets a little excited sometimes. It wants to do flips and stuff. So you just keep easing out on it with a couple screwdrivers. Just kind of, the reason for 2 of them is to try to kind of keep it square. And there's also a little teeny keyway. I mean a real small keyway. You can barely see it there in my hand. That will come out too. That's what keeps the pull start, or lets the pull start spin the crankshaft. So sometimes them things get sheared off. Hey, bear with me on the camera here, because this thing wiggling too much and it makes the camera go all crazy. So there you go. So you make sure you hang on to this keyway. I'm gonna stick the keyway, and these dowels, and probably that impeller all in a bag so I can keep them all together. So, all right. So that's everything right here. Next thing we're going to do is pull all these bolts out of this cover, this left side cover. They're 8mm, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 of them. So let me get those out, and I'll cut the camera back on right before I knock that off. Alright guys, I got all these bolts out of the side cover here. Now it's actually got a little tab here at the very top that you can use to knock it off of there. So stick a screwdriver behind the little tab there and tap it. It's gonna have a little bit of resistance. It's broke loose now because it's got the stator in it, and the stator is magnetized, so it takes a little bit to pull it off. So just pull this thing off kind of square, kind of wiggle it back and forth. Biggest thing that gets hung on these things is this water outlet down here, bottom right corner. So just make sure it's coming off there easy, just like that. Gasket got pulled into the flywheel, which isn't a big deal. We're going to end up replacing that too. So inside of this thing don't really look too bad. Doesn't really have a whole lot of crud or anything in it. So this bearing here will slide off the crankshaft most of the time. Sometimes you have to put a puller on it or wiggle the thing around to get it off of there. Alright, so let me take and tap that thing off. I don't know if I can get it with the, so you can't hardly get back behind there with the hammer. So I'm gonna probably end up trying to use the little 2-jaw to pull that off. And then I will show pulling the flywheel off. You can also go ahead and pull this starter gear off while it's all together here. Just wiggle this thing out. Well, no, you can't. You can't wiggle it out without the flywheel off. So let me get this bearing off, and then I'll pull the flywheel, and we'll get the starter gear out of the way, and then we really want to check to see how this left crank bearing is looking on this thing. So we can do that once we get all this apart. Alright guys, I got the little bearing off there. Wasn't much to it. I actually I couldn't find my 2-jaws real quick, so I just stuck a little 3-jaw on there and actually just tightened it down with my hand. So next thing we're going to do is pull this flywheel off. This is another item that you don't have to have a tool to get it off, but it sure does help. I've done this before with a 2-jaw, with a 3-jaw. I've had these on there very, very tight before, and they've really been a struggle with the 2 and 3 jaw. So I ended up breaking down and buying a puller for it. The key to this puller is make sure you put the bolt back in here, because if you press against the end of the crankshaft, you can flare it out, and the flywheel won't come off or won't go back on, or you can split your crankshaft. You can really mess up a lot of stuff like that. So just run this thing in. Might try to do it with the impact if it'll fit on here. A little impact. I don't know if it'll pull it off here or not, but we'll give it a shot. Alright, we'll get some live action here. Nope, ain't gonna get it. So let me get the Big Daddy out there, and we'll see if it'll pull it off of there. Guys, if the air compressor cuts on, I'll just cut the camera off because it's super loud when that thing turns on. There you go. It makes it look so easy, which actually it is easy if you got the right tools. So just back this thing off, and then back your center bolt out. And then you can take both the starter gear over here and the whole flywheel and the gear behind it off at the same time. There's also a keyway here. Pop that keyway up. I just like to stick it inside of the stator. Inside of the flywheel. Alright, and that gives you a little glimpse of the chains. This is your oil pump chain. This is what they call the intermediate cam chain. A lot of times this thing will have a slack in them. These brutes are notorious for getting slack chains on them. So this is your intermediate chain, and it looks like it's still got tension. I've taken these apart before, and you can move this tensioner 1/8 of an inch or so. What you want to check here really is there's a left crank bushing. If you got a Brute and spun a rod bearing, I know you probably done some research and see a lot of people talk about that. That's normally where the problem lies, is that left crank bushing getting worn, and then losing oil pressure and spinning the bearing. One way to check to see if that thing has any play in it, while everything's bolted together here, you can take the end of this crankshaft and see if it'll move up and down. And this one here is very, very tight. So it looks like the bushing is good in here. So this looks like it's probably just spun a bearing. I'm assuming that's what it is. Spun the rod bearing, and didn't really have to think anything to do with oil pressure here. Could have been doing wheelies or something like that. So alright, now what we're going to do is I'm going to take this tensioner out right here. This is the just an automatic tensioner for the oil pump chain. Take the tensioner out, and then the 3 bolts that hold the oil pump in, and go ahead and pull that out and stick it in a bag. And then I may start taking down the top end on these just to show you how you pull that down before we pull these cam chains off. So let me get the oil pump or the tensioner out first. 14 millimeter. You just loosen that thing up, and it's a spring loaded little plunger, and it'll fall out of there, and then you can take your 3 bolts out of your oil pump, and your whole oil pump will come off along with the chain. So it looks like this thing's tight, so we're not going to be having to replace that chain in this case. So let me get it apart. I'll cut the camera back on. Alright guys, so I got the oil pump off. This thing also has a couple dowels on it, very similar to the ones that were on the water pump cover. One of them goes in here and it actually came off with the cover. The other one is still stuck in here. I'm going to pull it out and just make sure we keep all that stuff together, because you wind up losing these, or just in cleaning the motor out and all that, you'll end up losing it in the parts washer or something like that. So make sure you keep all that together just so you don't lose any more parts. Alright, we got all this stuff off the side. Now we're going to go ahead and start taking some of these valve covers off. There's 4 valve covers, front and rear. Go ahead and pull all those off. Normally I would have set this thing at top dead center, but in this case we're going to tear it all the way down, so it really don't matter. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the valve covers off, and then we'll look at removing the head. I don't know, maybe the rear head first, just to do it like that. So let me get the valve covers off. Alright guys, well I've kind of changed my mind on how we're going to do this. I did get the valve covers off. I'm going to go ahead and take this intermediate cam chain off, the tensioner off, just to show how that's done. So what you want to do is the tensioner here just has 2 8mm bolts. Take those out, and actually you can pay attention as you take this off. It can show you how much more life you have left in your chain. It's spring loaded, so as it springs out, as you can see, the thing didn't move a whole lot. We're about a half a bolt hole off, so that thing is almost near the end of its life. So we will look at replacing that intermediate chain. You can kind of see how the spring loaded tensioner there works. So alright, let me throw this, well, set the tensioner to the side. Let me next thing you have to do to get this intermediate chain off, actually it won't come all the way off, but is loosen this bottom, or remove this bottom bolt on that guide, cam chain guide, and that gives you some slack in it to let that chain come off of the sprockets. What I usually do is just take it out and then stick the bolt back in and let the guide swing out to the back. Alright, so that leaves you some slack in there, and you actually can't get that off yet. I am going to have to take the top off, but I just wanted to show you how to get those 2 loose, and then we'll go to the heads and go ahead and pull those off. The heads on these things, the bolts you'll need to remove are these 2. These are very long bolts here on the outside. They're 8mm. You got an 8 here, an 8 here, and an 8 here. These 4 10mm headed bolts here on the inside, as well as the 8s across the top, and the rocker arm, whatever you want to call that, rocker arm cover will come off. So let me get all those removed. I'm going to probably go ahead and pull the front and the rear off at the same time. Guys, okay, also one other thing I didn't add is these 10mm bolts. They have these little washers on them. Make sure you pull those off. They're very, very thin to kind of help seal up the passage there to keep oil from coming out. So make sure you hold on to those and put those back in when you get ready to reassemble. Guys, one other thing I like to do before I pull these heads off to relieve a little bit of pressure on them is go ahead and remove these tensioners. I like to loosen this 12mm bolt before I take it off, just because it's kind of tough to do. You end up having to put in a vise to break this thing loose, and you have to take that bolt out to reinstall that tensioner. So I'll break that loose and then completely remove the 2 8mm and pull those out. So let me do that real quick before I pull the heads off. Guys, one other thing you can check, much like you did the tensioner on the front here, on the intermediate tensioner, is to see how much life you've got in these chains. I've got these bolts loose. There it goes, it springs out, and so that's extended completely all the way out, and you can stick that thing back in the hole, and that's as far as it'll go in. You got about a half an inch or so of life left in that chain, which is a whole lot. So we may, according on how bad everything else is, we may not even replace that those long cam chains, just that intermediate chain. So I'll let the owner know that. Alright, so got that one loose, and now what you want to do, take a hammer and tap up on this rocker arm cover, I guess you'd say. There's a ton of dirt on this thing. I probably should have blew it off a little bit before I started all this, but we'll get it all cleaned out. Alright, so there's your rocker arm cover. It just has some RTV, and then there's your cam, intake and exhaust valves. Nothing really looks out of place there, so looks pretty good. I do like to mark these things with an F and an R just to tell which way they come off. The cams, you don't really have to mark those. They actually have some different markings on the front cam as it does on the rear. So got that loose. I'll go ahead and pop this back one off, and we'll loosen the chains up and start to take the cylinders off. Alright guys, I got both of these rocker arm covers off, as well as the tensioner out of the front and rear. Just get these cams out. Normally I tie a piece of wire to these, but doesn't matter. I'm gonna tear it all the way down so we can just let the chain hang down in there. But you just fish this chain over top of the cam, slide it, and then this cam just slides right out. The cam is supposed to just slide right out. The chain's got a good bit of tension on it. That's why it doesn't come out quite so easy. So that's the front cam. Do the same thing with the rear. Alright guys, now we need to take the head bolts out. They're 14 millimeters. You got 4 of those, and you also have one 8mm bolt here that you also have to take out before the head will come off. So let me get those knocked loose. I'm gonna probably just hit them with the impact to pull them off. Alright guys, got all the head bolts loose and that little 8mm. One thing you wanted to make sure was when you pull these off, you get that washer. All 4 of those big head bolts have washers on them, so hang on to those, and let me get these off real quick, and I'll cut the camera back on right before I tap it off here. Alright guys, it's a good idea to have something absorbent under this thing, because there's always some coolant left in here. There's actually a bolt on the side of the cylinder over there that you can actually take out and drain coolant out, same as over here on this rear cylinder, that 8mm bolt. I never take those out, but I guess me making a mess in the floor is my own fault, because I don't drain all the coolant out. But there's going to be a little bit of coolant left in here. So I've got all the bolts loose, and it don't take much to get this thing separated. Just take and tap it. You can see coolant running out there. Actually, it's a decent amount in that cylinder. There's a couple dowel pins on here that that will hold it down. If you tap it up kind of square all the way around, it should come up out of there. It's hung on one of these back dowels back here. Don't want to pry in there too bad, because it's got the head gaskets in there, and you don't want to damage it. So just wiggle it, wiggle it, wiggle it, wiggle it. Goodness gracious. Usually don't take this much wiggling, but as y'all can see, it's coming off. There you go. So there's your front head. Valves look pretty good in it. There's your head gasket. I like to write on here which one goes where, because you wouldn't think this, but the heads are somewhat interchangeable, but the tensioner is in a different location on the front as opposed to the rear. So if you don't pay attention, you can bolt the front one up on the rear and then not have a spot for the tensioner, or likewise have 2 spots for the tensioner. So just make sure you write that on there. clean that clean the antifreeze out. There's got a little antifreeze in it, but also the other things you want to pull out of here while you got the cylinder here is this one tensioner, guide, the bottom guide will come out, as well as this little tube, little oil passage tube. Just make sure you pull that out because you don't want to get it bent when you're pulling the cylinder off, and also make sure you put that back in because it can cause all kind of issues if you don't put it back in. So, alright, got that done, and let me pull the rear one off. I'm just going to go ahead and pull the rear head off, and then I'll cut the camera back on when I get ready to pull this cylinder out. It's just pretty self-explanatory, but I'll still show you. Alright guys, got both the heads off now. Now we got to take the cylinders off. The cylinders had 3 bolts, one here on the side and 2 in the center. Same with the rear. Remove those and the cylinders will actually just slide right off. So I'm going to do that real quick. And I got to get that coolant out of there. Just aggravates me. So let me get me a rag to clean that out, and then we'll unbolt these cylinders and slide them off. Alright guys, there you go. Got the bolts out of it now. I can't get my camera to stand up straight. This is the story of my life. I got a new tripod on the way. It ain't gonna get here quick enough. Alright, so just same as you did the head, take and tap it just a little to get the get it to come up. This thing does have a gasket on it, but they're usually not stuck on there very bad. And ease it off. Gasket's kind of wedged in here a little bit. There we go. Got it come loose. I'll just slide the cylinder off, and then usually go dump this thing out and it'll have some coolant in it. And it did. So this is what you're left with. Front jug. These things have a nickel seal coating on them, which is real strong. That's the advantage. The disadvantage is it's very expensive to replace. It's very expensive to replace if you nickel seal it. It's also fairly expensive to replace if you bore it out and put a steel sleeve in it. So but also they very seldom wear out. So in these Brutes, most of the time, like this one is, where it spun a bearing. See the play in the I don't know if you can see it or not. Let me get the camera a little closer. Normally these front cylinder that spins it, if you pull straight in and out on that jug, on that piston, you can see it moving, and it's actually rocking up and down on the crank in there. So it spun that front bearing. And what you do on these a lot of times is, you can see this cylinder or the piston looks clean in it. The jug's pretty clean. They very seldom get scarred up unless your piston breaks or you get a bunch of dirt in it. So what you normally do is just replace the rings in it, and naturally replace the crankshaft, or either have it remanufactured or reconditioned, put another bearing in it, and put it back together. So that's what we're going to do in this case. I'm going to pull this back cylinder off and make sure it's not spun too. And then the next thing, we'll be taking a few more parts off over here and get ready to split the case. I'll cut the camera back on after I get the rear cylinder out. Guys, I'm sorry, but somehow the dang camera got cut on time lapse, and I time lapsed a couple videos, but they're so dang fast you can't even tell what I was doing. So just gonna give you a rundown of what we did. I took the clips out of the pistons, pushed the pins out here, and then to remove the cam chains, what you have is a shaft that goes through the motor here. It's like an intermediate chain shaft here. It has a snap ring on it. So you remove that snap ring. There's a snap ring and this gear on here. You remove that snap ring, and then there's also a little plate here. It slides up in here and holds that gear in. 2 Allen head bolts that have to be removed. So you remove those two Allen heads, that plate will fall out, and that will allow that shaft to slide out. Well, when the chain's on there, it don't slide out quite as easy as it's doing now. So what you want to do is go over here on this side and take your chain and work it till it comes off of this sprocket, and then push from the other side, and the shaft will come out just like this. And then you can just take and pull these two chains out, the intermediate chain and the rear cylinder chain, just right out like that. I'm sorry I didn't show you that, but like I say, it's so dang fast you wouldn't be able to see it if I did try to play it back. So I'm gonna stick this stuff in a bag. We're gonna jump over here on this right side, or I'm sorry, left side again, remove this oil tube and the bevel gear, and get ready to split the case on this thing. So cut the camera back on in just a sec. Alright guys, now what we're going to do is take this oil tube off here and this bevel gear. It's all 8mm bolts. To get that out, I'll pull the tube off first. There's one bolt there, one here, and one down here almost at the end of the tube. So you got 3 bolts in there, and to get that out, you usually have to use a screwdriver and kind of pry up on it a little bit, right at one of those joints, because it's it has a O-ring in there, and that's pretty much all that holds it. So pry up at it at the joint. There's that one. This one here's got so much mud on it, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to pry up at the joint or pry off of the mud. There you go. So your oil tube's off right there. Throw that in your box. And now we're going to pull this bevel gear. Well, one of the bolts that held the oil tube on held the bevel gear cover on, so I have to remove that. Just 2 more bolts, both 8mm. One's a real long one, one's a short one. So stick them in your cardboard and wiggle this thing around. It again has a O-ring that you have to kind of break the seal on to get it to come off. Can't quite get it pried back far enough to catch a screwdriver in it. Go, and it comes right off. Like I say, you can see the O-ring around there. It's just kind of crusty. Put that in your box, and then you've left with this gear in here. Have to remove it as well. Another snap ring. It's a bigger one this time, so put your snap ring pliers in there, pull that thing out, and then just grab this gear and it'll slide right off of this shaft, just like that. And you have to take that off so you can get the transmission apart once you get in there. So alright, got that out. Next thing we need to do, I'm going to stick this in a bag if I can find one real quick. Alright, got a bag here. We're going to remove the shifter up here on top. So again, that has to be done before you take the transmission out of it. It's just 3 bolts around this shift cover right here, 3 bolts, and then this cover will come off, and then there's an Allen head you can remove out of here. I also like to remove this bolt here. It's a 14mm. It's got a spring and a washer in it, a spring and a ball in it, and that's what actually makes it click into gear, I guess you could say. It's got the indentations on the shift shaft there. So if I can get this camera to stay up here, I'll show you what it looks like. Go ahead and pull that off. Like I said, 14mm. Break it loose. It has I believe it has a washer on there too. Yeah, it's on the nut. So there you go. You got your nut, or your bolt, your spring, and then you need a magnet to get that ball out of there. right there. Hang on to that thing. So stick that in your bag, and then remove these 3 bolts on this shift cover. Stick that in the cardboard in a second, and then wiggle it around. I like to tap on the shaft just a little bit. You don't want to mess the end of that shaft up because it is splined. A little tapping on it as you pull up on the cover will help it to come off. So and the camera keeps spinning around. Still won't come off, so pry up on it just a little bit and it slips off a little easier. Well, it did slip. There we go. So got the cover off. Then you're left with this linkage here. Take your Allen head, I think it's like a 6mm, and remove that bolt. Alright, and then that will allow everything to slide out. Sorry about that. To slide out once you get the cases apart. Put all this in a bag. Alright, that's pretty much it. Now we need to take some bolts out of the crankcase. What you got here, you got some 10mm bolts right here at the front cylinder hole, I guess you'd call it. And then you got 8mm all the way along here around the edge. Another 10 here that has to be removed, another 10 here, 2 8s, 1 8 in that hole, 1 8 in that hole, 8 here, 8 here, and then you got 2 10s on the inside here, 1 here and 1 here. There's no real order in having to remove those. Just take them all out, and then what I like to do is normally stick a screwdriver in here right by the starter and pry out on it a little bit to get it to pop loose. And then there's also a pry tab right here on the back to get it to pop loose. But alright, you got to get those out, and then we're going to have to flip it around. There's like 3 bolts on the other side you had to remove, so we'll get all those took out, and then I'll flip it around and loosen those 3 up on the back side, flip it back over, and then we can pry it apart. Alright, let me get these out on this side. Alright guys, I got the motor flipped around. This is over here on the right side, and there's 3 bolts you have to remove on this side before you can get the crankcase to split. 10mm here, a 10mm here, and a 8mm on the top right here. And that's all we got left, so let me pull those out. I'll spin it back around and show you how I pry the cases apart. Alright guys, here's what we're working with. Got all the bolts out now, and like I mentioned before, what I like to do is just stick a screwdriver in here right between the starter and the actual crankcase and get it to kind of break loose, and then go back here on the back side, see if you can get something, a screwdriver in there on this little notch back here on the back side. And I say this so many times, I know y'all probably get tired of hearing me say it, but what you want to do is pull it off square so that everything comes off easy. And I'm gonna see if I can slide it off here. Biggest thing here is you make sure you don't want to mar this this bearing up as you're sliding it off. There you go. That's what that side of the case looks like. Pretty clean in there. And then you're left with the transmission here. The oil screen, let me see what it looks like. And let me make sure I don't have any O-rings. I mean, not O-rings, washers. I did have a washer left off of that shaft there. So this is what you're left with. one easy thing to check to see what kind of condition your motor's in is pull this oil screen out. Make sure there ain't any metal shavings or anything like that in it. This actually looks pretty good for it to be spun a bearing, but so you can see here a little bit better the play. And then now we're going to take the transmission out, and tell you what I might do. I may just lay it on the table here until I can get a box to put everything in, but I'll show you how to do it. First thing is, this shaft here will just slide right out. You don't have to even do anything hard to get it out of there. And a lot of times this one shaft that runs out the other side of the clutch over here, sometimes you have to tap it with a hammer to get it out. It's kind of stuck in there. I think that's going to be the case here. So let me grab my rubber hammer, and you don't want to use a steel hammer in this case because it's threaded on the end, and that's actually what holds the secondary clutch on. So you don't want to beat up the end of the shaft. So just hang on to both of these shafts here and tap this end. And there when the gear fell off the end of it. Almost all the way out there too. Alright. So it's goodness gracious, it's going to be tight the whole way. Okay, so there you go. There's your shaft. I got to grab that gear. It just fell off. And then this other shaft will slide right off here. Make sure you hang on to that washer on it too. So the parts that fell off were a gear, a bearing that goes in the gear, and then a washer that goes on that. So slide all that stuff back on here. Like that, and stick that in a box, keep it all together. Alright, the next thing I'm going to do is probably going to I may go ahead and unbolt that starter, which is just two 8mm bolts, and it slides right off. And then I'll rig this thing up in the press to press that crank out. I'm going to have to get it off and get it to my machine guy to redo that crankshaft. So let me get the starter off, and then I might cut the camera back on when I get it over in the press. Alright guys, this is what I got rigged up for the press the crankshaft out. Just got my little homemade engine stand here up under it just to support it up, and just pressing down on the crank here. You want to make sure those your rods don't hit anything as they come out, and then just put a little pressure on this thing. See if you can get it to pop out. I think I'm gonna have to scoot it over a little bit because it's not all the way on my little engine stand. So let me reposition this thing and see if I can get it to start out. Alright guys, I got it in there now. Got it kind of squared up with the engine stand, I guess you want to call that, whatever you want to call it. Alright, so this is going to take two hands because I got to have one under there to catch the crankshaft as it falls out. So stick your hand under there to hold on to the crankshaft. This is actually coming out of here a little easier than some of them. It's all the way out now. I've had some that were pretty tough in the past, and actually have been so bad. This one didn't do it, but the bearing and all that stayed in there. I've had them in the past before actually break these little retainer ears out, rip the heads off of those bolts. It still comes out, and you can fix that, but what happened is that bearing would have gotten stuck on the crank, and it ended up tearing up all that stuff as it comes out. But there's no other way to get it out, so that's what you got to do. Alright, there you go. There's the crankshaft ready to be worked on. I'm gonna get this thing machined up, put some more bearings in it, and I actually got another one here too, so I'm gonna have a spare sitting on the shelf. Alright, well, thank you guys for checking my video out, and as you can see, we got a whole cardboard full of bolts over here. So we've got everything apart. I'm gonna, like I said, drop that thing off at the machine guy, order some parts, and I'll have another video of putting the thing back together. So you guys check that one out. Appreciate y'all watching my videos. Hit the like button, subscribe, ask me any questions if you got them, and I'll respond to them. So have a good night.